So, good morning, everyone. Much has been said about Sri Lanka's biodiversity, and for that very reason, Sri Lanka is among the world's top 35 biodiversity hotspots. We do have something like 4,000 species of flowering plants, 107 species of freshwater fish, 59 species of amphibians, 174 species of reptiles, 435 species of birds, 140 species of mammals, and several thousand invertebrates. It is also the only country in the world where we can see the world's largest land mammal and the world's largest sea mammal in one day. 2 years ago, in this very room, the ADB kicked off a knowledge program series on Sri Lanka called the Serendipity Knowledge Series. Times were very different then. Tourism had seen some of the worst and the most unprecedented times in history, and it was all about moving forward. Well, the discussion has moved forward. The biodiversity in this country is blessed with it and is inextricably intertwined with tourism and the rising numbers we have seen maybe. But what happens if we don't recognize the imperative to conserve our biodiversity, which directly correlates with tourism? It is only if we conserve and maximize what we have and make it work can it become a large contributor to the economy, an economy that is still floundering on the edge. We need to infuse international best practices in wildlife and nature-based tourism. We need to have the private sector's input in conservation through meaningful partnerships with the public sector. Not that it's not happening now, it is, but is it enough? And we need to find out how other countries are doing it right to ensure these ecosystems thrive while the economy thrives too. So the discussion we will have a little later on in the morning will be how we can conserve our biodiversity and make it relatable to our tourism industry. But before all that, I'd like to invite Mr. Takafumi Kadana, the country director of the ADB Sri Lanka Resident Mission, for his welcome remarks. Mr. Takafumi Kaduna.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Good morning, everyone, government officials, distinguished speakers, panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 10th Serendipity Knowledge Program, or what we call SKOP event, which is our ADB's platform to deliver knowledge solutions in Sri Lanka. And we hold it regularly, usually 4 times a year, to bring together experts and stakeholders to learn and deliberate upon topics important to the country in sectors and thematic spaces that the ADB supports. We partner with the National Planning Department of the Ministry of Finance to deliver these events, and very happy to have Director General Kumar Siri, who will be delivering the closing remarks later on today. So today's topic, or as already introduced, is tourism and biodiversity conservation, which is certainly a very important topic in Sri Lanka currently, as the country looks to strengthen high potential economic sectors to support recovery and place the economy firmly on a high growth trajectory. And tourism certainly is a key driver of growth, but its expansion must be done in a sustainable and inclusive manner, and that's why we're here today. Just looking back at what ADB does in the tourism sector, we've been supporting the tourism sector since the early 2000s in the Asia and the Pacific, but it was only, I think, in 2019 that we started our operations here in Sri Lanka following the Easter Sunday attacks, which took a heavy toll on the industry. And with a focus on supporting the recovery, we started this technical assistance, or TA, which was valued at $1.5 million, which continued to help the sector build resilience after the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent economic downturn. The TA supports tourism resilience by supporting small-scale operators, such as homestay owners, and by promoting tourism as an employer of women and youth. The TA is also supporting the diversification of tourism product offerings by developing roadmaps and assisting the implementation of the new strategic action plan for recovery of the tourism sector. And we're very happy to see the numbers, how the tourism industry, the footfall has recovered very rapidly in the recent months. ADB is also preparing a project that we would like to finance in the tourism space, which will support policy actions to introduce reforms in the tourism sector to enhance resilience to shocks and strengthen institutions and potentially streamline decision-making as well so that the private sector can thrive. Investment component we have under this project, which will develop tourist amenities and conserve heritage monuments in identified destinations. And we're hoping that we can table this to our board by the end of the year. So today we will hear from the keynote speaker, Mr. Vincent Shacks, who is from Cape Town. Thank you for coming, a long way. He will be sharing his extensive experience from the African region on how the private sector could partner with the government, local communities, and the people to play a pivotal role in biodiversity conservation while reaping economic benefits for the countries. We have an eminent panel that will deliberate on adapting such approaches to Sri Lanka and share their experiences from the diverse areas that they represent. I hope our audience today will engage with the panel by raising challenging questions and driving the discussion to contribute to the dialogue on developing Sri Lanka's tourism to realize its potential in a sustainable and inclusive manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kadano, for giving us a background of SKOP as well as a little bit of information as to what the thoughts behind this program is today. We will now be hearing from the Director General of the South Asia Regional Department of the ADB, Mr. Takeo Konishi.
Thank you very much. Officials of the government of Sri Lanka, esteemed resources persons, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you in Colombo. I'm pleased to be opening this 10th Serendipity Knowledge Program event today on this important topic of Sri Lanka and ADB. Tourism is an important export diversification opportunity for many ADB countries. It is a very high employer and provides substantial foreign exchange earning and is complementary to other important sectors such as agriculture, while also bringing a ready-made market consumer to the rural areas and secondary destination. Now, each country is able to utilize its own unique sets of natural and cultural resources for competitive offer to the rapidly growing global tourism market. Now, tourism offers entrepreneurial opportunities for relatively low investment and is accessible to semi-skilled residents. The seasonal and part-time nature of the employment in the sector enables diverse career path opportunity, including for women. Now, in the new green and blue economy approaches, the United Nations has identified tourism as one of the 10th sector of increased significance. By reducing carbon emission and helping protect natural assets like forest area and removal of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, the tourism sector can assist in mitigating the most harmful effects of climate change. Natural assets, the contribution to the growth sustainable tourism like wetland, forest, and coastal area creates a natural barriers to impact of climate shocks, including hurricanes and floods. While recognizing this potential, we also know that tourism is not without its challenges. Some of the pre-COVID-19 challenges, such as over-tourism, are reoccurring in a variety of destinations, and the protest by residents against visitors member and visitor behavior is now occurring regularly. It is evident that more sustainable and resilient form of tourism is required for the benefit of the humanity and the planet. Sustainability and resilience tourism does not happen by itself, and it requires a concerted effort from all stakeholders along the tourism value chain, from the generating markets in Europe, People Republic of China, Japan, Australia, to name a few, all the way to destinations like Thailand, Nepal, Indonesia, and of course, Sri Lanka. Sustainability is at the forefront of corporate thinking amongst the large tour operator and hotel chains. Laws and regulatory requirement and tourism business to take responsibility for sustainable practices along their supply chain. But more than 80% of all available beds in tourism are individually owned and operated, and creating scale in substantive practices remain a challenge. Green energy provision, waste reduction, circular economy practice, local employment, and have all been proven to work well at the individual enterprise level. Elevating these sustainable practices to the sector as a whole still needs a lot of work. As Taka mentioned, since the early 2000s, ADB has actively supported tourism through lending technical assistance and knowledge support operations. In response to the growing demand for our developing member countries, ADB leadership is actively looking to increase the pipeline of tourism projects, emphasizing sustainable resilience and inclusive of the sector, which is now a formal emerging area within the ADB Water and Urban Development Sector Office. Now, ADB has committed a total over 5.3 billion to the tourism-related interventions since 2010, and combined with counterpart and co-financing, this amount increased to 7.5 billion. Technical assistance project had the largest share, 55% in terms of the number of projects, but in terms of financing, 94.2% of all ADB funded was committed as loans. Now, the total financing is highest through our work in transport sector, which is supporting climate resilience, access and connectivity for tourism. Typically, investment comprise district and rural roads, border checkpoints, airports, and international and national ferry terminals. Through our water and urban infrastructure work, we create better tourism destinations. Finances amount to 683 million, which typically comprise wastewater management system to better manage environmental impact or help increase and spread tourism benefit across urban settlements. Our tourism development support has covered 30 countries, and the largest allocated has been to the South Asia region, about 1.15 billion, followed by the Central West Asia, about 763 million, and Southeast Asia, about 656 million. This shows that tourism is an important sector for many countries where ADB works, and we are using that experience to support Sri Lanka's tourism development, where we have an ongoing TA project and are close to finalizing a sector lending program. ADB is partnering with various stakeholders in Sri Lanka to make tourism more resilient and more sustainable. Part of that support is focusing on improving the resilience of the tourism sector. ADB recognizes two approaches to resilience. First, climate resilience by ensuring we conserve the natural and cultural attraction of the country through adaptive and mitigative measures. Second, market resilience by ensuring Sri Lanka has something to offer for different market from across the world, and ideally market segment that brings higher income to the country. At today's SKOP event, we are bringing these two topics together: how Sri Lanka can further improve its biodiversity offer, particularly through wildlife tourism, and the role of the private sector can play in that. Now, wildlife tourism is one of the most valuable segment globally, and with such healthy number in iconic species such as leopards and elephant and blue whales, the country has the potential to be much higher value destination than currently is. ADB is a firm believer in the need for sharing responsibility between the private and public sector in tapping into the resources available to Sri Lanka for higher value sustainable tourism. The total number of visitors to Sri Lanka only tells half of the story. Now it's important to extract value for each visitor in economics and conservative terms. We have a distinguished panel who will share their insight into the needs to happen to create a sustainable tourism subsector that attracts these higher spending visitors and provides direct conservation benefits. To set the scene, we are pleased to have with us Mr. Vincent Shacks from Wildness from South Africa, who is joining us here all the way from Cape Town. And Wilderness Company has been at the forefront of wildlife conservative tourism across Southern and East Africa, almost exclusively operating in protected areas for the benefit of nature and people. Before handing over to Vincent, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all of you present here today and for interest in the topic. And I encourage all of you to use this question system that we have in place to raise any issues important addressing to your needs. ADB will follow up today's discussion with high interest and take guidance from our ongoing work in support for sustainable and resilient tourism sector in Sri Lanka. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Konishi. And like he and Mr. Kadono mentioned, our keynote speaker is from Cape Town, South Africa, and he's the Global Impact Manager of Wilderness, Vincent Shacks, who we are welcoming here today to give of his expertise in how South Africa does tourism and biodiversity conservation, and maybe take a leaf or two out of their book. But before I call him up, we do have something to show you.
Why do we care? For one reason. There's only one Earth, and we only get one chance to save it. Earth's incredible biodiversity is in crisis. Species and their habitats are disappearing faster than ever. And as custodians of some of the world's last true wilderness areas, we have a responsibility to act, for now and for future generations. This belief is at the core of Wilderness, two halves of our operation. Hospitality on one side, conservation on the other, feeding into one significant whole. High-value, low-volume conservation tourism that generates the resources we need to make a lasting impact, improving lives while helping protect the world's wildest places. At Wilderness, we want to increase the world's wilderness together, doubling the land we help protect by 2030, and then to double it again and again and again. A continuous cycle of conservation. But how do we do this? By identifying 3 pivotal focus areas that lead us to make better, more intentional decisions about where to direct our efforts. Empowering local communities, educating children, and protecting people and wildlife from threats to their coexistence. These 3 areas guide our investment decisions and determine our conservation priorities as a business. This is how it works. Our impact starts on the ground at our camps, the heart of our business. This is where we share the natural world with our guests. This is where we employ local people, creating job opportunities for nearby communities. This is also where we build with the lightest footprint possible, constantly implementing measures to reduce carbon emissions. Our impact expands from our camp through what we call our spheres of influence, from opening migration corridors, reforestation, and reducing threats to wildlife in our concessions, to empowering local communities with education at a regional level and growing a conservation economy through stimulating small business ventures in the tourism supply chain, to working alongside governments at a country level to develop long-lasting global protection for the land, its people, and its wildlife. And while we like to think of ourselves as pioneers of purpose, it's a journey we'd never have dreamt of attempting alone. Together with our partners for change, NGOs, communities, businesses, and our valued travelers, we've built a network of positive force, a collaborative ecosystem that maximizes impact. And it's worked. Today, our dedicated team of 3,000 people create captivating journeys to more than 60 camps in iconic wild destinations for 40,000 guests every year. We help protect over 6 million acres and counting across 7 biomes, supporting 59 vulnerable and endangered IUCN Red List species. We've introduced more than 20,000 children to the joy and potential of the natural world and the significant role they have in protecting it. Our empowerment programs are working to support local communities that understand the value of ecotourism, and a more harmonious existence between people and animals has been created. But our work is never done. We are constantly measuring our success and making adjustments. It's a little something we refer to as the theory of change. We articulate the problem, identify the root cause, and carry out activities that solve them. The success of which is defined by clear outcomes, making sure what we contribute to generates results and positive change. Because we, more than anyone, expect the best, holding ourselves to the highest standards. We're aspiring to be the benchmark for conservation tourism, changing people's viewpoints on how they travel and interact with the land they leave behind. We believe that the world's wilderness areas will save mankind. And because of that, we will always be committed to being pioneers of purpose.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for this incredible opportunity to present our story from Africa and share a little bit about the lessons we've learned and continue to learn. My name is Vincent Shaks. As you've heard already a few times, I'm from Cape Town, South Africa. I'd like to thank the team at ADB for such a warm welcome in Sri Lanka and for all the Sri Lankan people that I've met, for being so hospitable and especially having some sympathy for the latest cricket result, which I appreciate very much. So the video that you guys just saw captures the message that I want to bring across today. The presentation will dig in a little bit deeper to specific cases from certain countries. It's been mentioned a few times that I'm from South Africa, and that's correct. I'm from South Africa, and I think it's important to mention that of the 8 African countries that we operate in, a lot of our work, most of our work happens outside of South Africa. So we'll be presenting some stories here from the other 7 countries mainly, where I see a lot of parallels with what I've already learned and heard from the story here in Sri Lanka. The way our business started was very modest. It was a very humble beginning. It was 2 passionate guides working out of Botswana in 1983. And it was their love for nature and their desire to show what they had fallen in love with to other people. And trying to figure out how to do that, how best to get people to see, understand, and love what they saw. And that was the start of tourism, or photographic tourism in Botswana. And as you can see in the imagery there, it was real adventure. It was keeping people on the edge of their seats and really getting them stuck into what we still see as our main product, which is the wilderness. Today, the situation is slightly different. We focus a lot on the hospitality and services that we are able to offer in these wild landscapes. But nothing has changed in terms of the values that we hold, in that we want to get our guests to see the wilderness and to get them as deep into these wilderness areas as possible. The organization today is a little bit more than 2 guides. We, as I mentioned, started in 1983. We're currently operating in 8 countries with over 60 camps. We host about 40,000 guests a year. And one of the key metrics that we measure is the amount of land that we help to protect. Currently, it sits at around 2.4 million hectares. And that is done in partnership with government departments and community trusts. This is not a single effort. This is an effort that's done as a partnership. And if we look at the areas of those 2.4 million hectares that we run, 97% of those 2.4 million hectares are either protected areas or community-controlled land. Only 3% of that 2.4 million hectares is private. A very important stat from that slide is the fact that over 90% of our staff are from adjacent communities. It's a little bit deeper than just saying the staff are from the local country. The staff are from the adjacent communities. And these are the people that essentially pay the price for us being able to have such an incredible tourism product. And it's really important that the structure of our business is built in a way that makes sure there are incentives for the local communities who live alongside these protected areas. They simply cannot survive without the support of these local communities. So we want to talk a little bit about our goal as a company. And as I mentioned, we currently, the area under our influence is currently around 2.3 million hectares. Our goal is to double that by 2030 to 5 million hectares, and we don't want to stop there. We want to make sure that these large interconnected landscapes are protected in a way that is done so over a long term. And it's very important to state that all of the work we do and the investments we make are done with the idea of doing this for a long time. You saw briefly in the video the mention of the spheres of influence, and I'm going to take you through these spheres of influence, which we use as our business growth model, and share some examples of how some of those are playing out. To go through them again, we realized that if we're going to grow, growth looks a little bit different than simply just increasing the amount of camps we have. That is the start. It's what we see as the seed for growth. But growth in the natural environment needs to happen in a way that will ensure it stays for a long term. The product is essentially a natural product. It's a product that grows along organic principles. And it is really important that the business itself embeds itself into the environment as much as possible. And that means doing a little bit more than just building camps. The start, however, is the camp. Outside of that, we talk about our concessions. These are the areas we use to operate. So the areas where you would traditionally do your game drives, your walks, your canoe safaris. And the product there is a healthy environment. The product there is the protection of species, and charismatic species in most cases, because that's what people come to see. So the question is, what are you doing as an operator to make sure that those concessions are healthy from a biodiversity point of view? Region is where you can start telling the difference between operators that are doing a good job and operators that are doing a fair or acceptable job. Region is normally part of the deal that is not put in the contract. It's part of the deal that is not part of the business plan. And here we start looking at communities living outside of your concession area, your contracted area of operation. And as I mentioned earlier, this is where the real price is paid for the tourism product. So we spend a huge amount of time and effort on the idea of coexistence. How do animals and people live with each other? Education, supporting education and supporting the ability of kids to learn better, not just creating education facilities. What are those fine things needed for children to be able to learn and absorb knowledge? And then there are various ways that we assist communities with social support. Outside of that, again, we need to start understanding what influence our operation has on the country and at country level. And this means that while our organization, we're privileged enough to have a dedicated team that work on impact specifically, we tell everyone that the impact is baked into the business and that the impact department is actually the largest department in the company simply because everybody has a role to play when it comes to impact, from housekeeping all the way to the CEO. And it's very important that meetings like this take place and that there's a presence from the tourism bodies to make sure that policy and planning is done in a way that is investment friendly, that makes sure that the correct products are developed in the correct ways, and that the sufficient guardrails are in place to protect communities and sensitive wildlife species. This is something that needs to be done by senior management of a business. It cannot be done by the guides or the managers of the camps. So it really needs to be brought in by the whole company. Finally, as most of you know, the issue around climate change and the protection of carbon sinks, we're in a unique position in that we co-manage large landscapes, large areas, together with government and communities. And there is a role that can be played going forward in how to protect carbon in these environments. And this is a new field for us, but we see it as part of our responsibility as managers of these large tracts of land to start understanding what role carbon will play in all of this. I do want to just start off with some of the basic minimum standards we have at camp level. We have our own group environmental minimum standards, which we enforce on ourselves, and have been assessing our camps each year, twice a year, against these minimum standards, covering the various fields that you see there. We're very proud of the fact that we're able to present results on from each one of these camps on an annual basis for over a decade. And it shows, I think, not just the performance of the camp, but also the capacity for us to grow through learning. We are continuously changing the way we see operations of camps, and this is all based on the information we collect from these assessments. Three critical elements of having a minimum standard is, if you go, sorry, I just want to make sure you can see my pointer. No, you can't. So the three critical elements for any minimum standard, and this is a very good way of assessing if a company is doing an effective job of auditing themselves or managing their operations, is that they have a minimum standard. And it's important that that minimum standard is visible to anyone who wants to see it. The second thing is whether they measure that standard. Are there audits that are done at these camps? Are there results from these audits? And the last point is, are the results of those audits available? I think if any operator can show those three elements, you start realizing that the values of the business are tied into operating sustainably. So it's a very simple metric, but a very tough one to keep up. We try and report on these metrics on an annual basis at country level. Those are the regional reports you see on the top of the slide there. And you can get this information for each of the camps on an annual basis out of our group. Moving into a concession level, at the very basic, in terms of the very basic needs of a concession, it's monitoring and management of the wildlife species in that area. And we have a number of ranger-based programs that we run out of Rwanda, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Botswana. And remember, in many countries, this is often seen as a job of the government to look after areas, to provide patrols, to provide rangers, these services that relate to the protection of wildlife. It's no different in all of the countries we operate in, but we realize that many times these departments are under-resourced, or under-skilled, and it's a simple effort, and it's in our interest to have our rangers working alongside these government officials to ensure that the areas remain safe and healthy from a biodiversity perspective. At the end of the day, this is the product that we're selling. Moving into the regional level, I want to share a story out of Rwanda, which, by the way, I see many similarities between Rwanda and Sri Lanka from a geographic point of view, from an operational point of view, political point of view. And I think there are many lessons that you can learn from this country. And we have really enjoyed the lessons we've learned and continue to learn in the country. It's a wonderful product, and it's required that we often do things differently to how we did it in Southern Africa. Sabinyo is a little camp just outside of Volcanoes National Park in the northern part of Rwanda. It's a stunning part of the world, and the product there is built around gorilla tracking. Sabinyo is a very modest camp. It's been there for many years, but it is Rwanda's first community-owned lodge. It's still owned by the community. It's owned by the Sabinyo Community Livelihoods Association, or SKOP, and it's operated by Wilderness. And what SKOP have done, and really stand out head and shoulders above many other community organizations, is very strong governance of how the partnership between Wilderness and them works, and making sure that the benefits that come from the very busy, very popular tourism product are seen by the communities that live around Volcanoes National Park. As I mentioned, the lodge is a modest lodge. It's very comfortable. It's very busy. It's been around for many years. The product, however, is built on tracking. The product is built on getting out into Volcanoes National Park and spending time with these incredible species. And many people will not get the opportunity to do this. And it's something that needs to be protected. And we see protection as not just being the ability to put rangers out there or guests in the field, but also keep the communities that are actually the custodians of this product incentivized for that. Some of the SKOP achievements are bulleted there. I won't go into detail of those, but you can see that there's a number of interventions that the community themselves have taken control of. It's important for me to mention that of all of those points raised there, this is not something that is driven by us as the private sector. Our job is to get guests to travel to an area, to find the guests and bring them to the country and provide a world-class experience for them. It's the community who need to have the agency to decide what they want to do with the money and where they want to put that money. And SKOP have been an excellent example of how to do that, focusing on the poorest of the poor in their community, focusing on initiatives that will benefit the community as a whole, getting buy-in from everyone, and as I mentioned earlier, just ensuring proper governance to see the trickle down of benefits from the top all the way down to the poorest members of the community. So this is a partnership we're very proud of, and a lot of the effort of our operations in Rwanda go into ensuring that this partnership is nurtured and is healthy, so that we can continue to get the community members to realize benefits from tourism, to directly see that the gorillas in Rwanda are leading to a bridge over a dangerous river, or a school for my child, or health insurance for my grandmother, or a house for a poor relative. It's really important that that connection is always reinforced. The achievements for Rwanda at a national level, again, there's a few stats that you can pick up on there. This is probably more from an economic point of view, but you'll see we've tried to show some of the results under our 3 pillars, which are empower, educate, and protect. And this is over a period of 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. And these are the benefits that continue to reinforce why tourism is an essential part of Rwanda's economy. It not just creates the various benefits you've seen for the communities or the various revenue for the governments, but it has instilled a sense of pride for the country, from the people who live next to the Volcanoes National Park all the way into Kigali, into the city where people live and are perhaps not that attached to the natural product. Everyone is proud of Rwanda. Everyone is proud of their product. The gorilla has become an ambassador for Rwanda, and that's the way it should be, because it is and should be a high value item for the country. But that needs to be developed. It's not something you simply get by having a charismatic species in your country. It's something that needs to be developed carefully by the private sector and government. I also want to share with you, very often the projects we work in, and these are some of the more successful projects, are ones that move across various spheres of influence. And this is a project that we support in Botswana, very close to one of our premier concessions. The problem here that we were experiencing outside of our concessions by the communities was human-elephant conflict. So working together with a non-profit called EcoExist, who had done extensive work on elephant movement, realized that the source of the conflict came from the fact that elephants were restricted in their movement between dry woodland areas and water points on a daily basis. So by using this movement data, the NGO identified corridors that the elephants needed to be kept open to avoid this conflict with people when they're making these daily movements. The problem, however, was that there were agricultural fields that were built across these migration routes. And when we looked at these agricultural fields, realized that the fields were not intensively used at all. In fact, the yields in those fields were so small, which meant that essentially they could be smaller. And working through a conservation agriculture methodology, EcoExist worked with farmers, improved the seeds they were using, the methods they were using to farm on smaller pieces of land, and work together with the land board from the council to make these fields smaller, to open up some networks for elephants to move through. What we found after working with the farmers is not only were we able, or EcoExist able, to open up these corridors for elephants to move, but the fact that they were farming better showed a high increase in the yield of the crop that they were farming. And in this case, it was the millet crop. So not only had they increased their food security because they were farming better, the fields were smaller, elephants were allowed easy access through the fields, less conflict. There was also an excess crop that these farmers had on an annual basis. The next step then was to look into what we call a conservation economy or wildlife economy, is how can we turn that excess crop into a product? And EcoExist then moved on to develop Okavango craft breweries, brought in a brewmaster from South Africa and figured out a way to craft beer from the excess millet and purchase that millet from these farmers. So now they are getting a cash incentive as well as food security. That beer is brewed very close to the hub of tourism in the Okavango Delta. The brewery makes that available, and as a camp, beer is one of our key products to supply to our guests. It's a simple pivot from one beer supplier to another, and we are able to supply that beer in our camps to our guests. A very strong method of ensuring that elephants are protected, not just through research, not just through community involvement, but through market principles. A product being created and a tourism entity agreeing to purchase that product, support that supply chain, and making sure that the farmers are benefiting not just through improved food security, but also the fact that they now earn money. At a country point of view, I'm going to share a story of another one of our premier camps in Botswana. A paper was published on the work that we had done through this camp. This camp was built many years ago, in 1993, I believe this camp was built, and the research work looked into what influence this camp had had on the way tourism had developed in Botswana based on quality standards, environmental management, conservation initiatives, financial contributions, policy planning, conservation research, and public-private partnerships. Mambo Camp is an incredible area. It's an incredible camp. It's a wonderful product, and we've had excellent support from the government to ensure that this product remains as it is, continues to grow and develop in a manner that is long-term, in a manner that ensures that it continues to grow and improve. The lodge and the rooms are obviously, as you can see, are excellent facilities. The cuisine, the dining, the services are world-class. It really does, as I mentioned, these camps, while they are highly luxurious, are in absolutely wild areas where it is not safe to walk around. They are not fenced in. Animals are moving between the rooms every single night. They are jumping onto the decks. It is wild Africa. And that's what we're selling. We're not selling soft pillows and good cuisine. We're selling wild Africa. And this is the part that changes people's lives. They can get soft pillows in Milan and other parts of Europe, but this they can't get anywhere else. And this is what we protect, this is what we invest in. And the only way we can protect and invest in this is to ensure that we have impact in all of these spheres. This is the product that gets people coming back. And any business that has a genuine interest in their survival will be able to clearly show how they are investing back into this part of the product. This last slide from Mambo is also very important. Part of what we sell as a company is exclusivity. It's critical. It's something that doesn't exist in many African countries anymore. And we have to fight for it almost on a daily basis to ensure that it stays, because the magic of what we offer lies in this exclusive offering. It lies in the ability or opportunity for you to travel around a concession and not see another vehicle, to drive around with your guide, get this personal experience together with nature, together with the animals that you're going to spend time with. And this is something that is an absolute hook for the clientele that we see. A very high percentage of our guests are return guests. And this is something that they're after, is this exclusivity. The research found that the Mambo had influenced the destination's quality standards, how it's marketed, promoted, and also in the conservation of endangered species. So over the course of 30 years, the holding company has also been influential in the development and implementation of tourism and conservation policy, environmental awareness among youth, and also conservation research. And this was great justification for us as a company to show that our impact has not just come from bringing high numbers of guests into camps and providing revenue for certain government departments. It really is embedded into everything, each one of our spheres, and this was great recognition of that. We run a very strong environmental education program called Children in the Wilderness. You saw a little bit of it in the film. Very important to us. We've currently just launched this in Tanzania and Kenya, so we are now running it in all of the countries we operate in. And this is work that we're very proud of. Not only do we run eco clubs through the schools that we have, we also have, every year, we block book camps in each of our countries. No guests, just children. Get the kids into camp, get them to engulf themselves in nature, understand what the product's about, find ways of becoming involved in the product as a career if they want to, but mostly understanding how an ecosystem works and what an ecosystem does for you, whether you get involved in the industry or not. And this is a very rewarding part of our job and my job and all of our staff who get very involved in this part of the business. Finally, at a global sphere, we, as I mentioned, have become involved in what role we have to play in carbon sequestration. We're currently working on a project in the Kafue area of Zambia. The green area is the core protected area, Kafue National Park in Zambia, and the grey areas around are wildlife management areas that currently are not being utilized because they are not a good enough tourism product and are experiencing heavy deforestation. We believe that there are solutions to offer the government there through carbon, and the idea there is to be able to generate revenue from the carbon sequestration to put back into communities to ensure that there are livelihoods that encourage them not to cut the forests down. So this is a very big project, one that it's still very early days for us and we're learning a lot, but we feel that it is our role to start getting involved in that because of the sheer scale of the amount of land that we help to protect. We touched briefly on the theory of change that we use to measure how we do things, to be more intentional about what we do, to make sure that we know what we have to do and also what we shouldn't be doing. And that's done by identifying threats and moving backwards from the threats. If we know what the threats are, we should have a very clear understanding of which activities we should be doing to deal with those threats. And that can only be done if you measure it. It can only be done if you have a plan. And the theory of change is our plan, and it brings us into our 3 pillars, which are empower, educate, and protect. And all the impact work we do will fall under those three key pillars. Finally, I don't expect you to go through the detail of this, but just to give you an idea of which projects and the kinds of projects that we're running under each of these pillars in the various countries. They move from various education initiatives like Children in the Wilderness. A lot of it is around food security under the empowerment pillar and finding ways of improving the supply chain, the tourism supply chain, so that we can benefit people living around the areas we operate in, incentivize them to start small business. Instead of buying vegetables from a large grocer that imports from very far away, can we empower local communities to start up a small business to provide us with something that we could use in camp? It's a market that's waiting and ready to serve. The question is, who is going to build those supply chains? And that's an effort that has to be put in deliberately by government and the tourism market. So these are some of the projects that we're supporting. And just to cover, this is the final slide. Again, I think from the various meetings I've had this week and discussions I've had, I think the last message I'd like to leave with you is this idea of long-term thinking. The product we're dealing with here is not manufactured. It's not something that's made in a factory. It's not something that can be managed along financial years. It's something that needs to be managed long term. The operators, the private sector that you get involved in your country need to be long-term thinkers and need to show initiatives that are thinking on the long term. And for us, the lesson I can say from this is none of this can happen without the support of surrounding communities. And it's really important. There's a unique opportunity that Sri Lanka have to start doing this and actually leapfrog Africa and take those lessons that have been learned there and create a wonderful product in this country. You are sitting on an absolute gold mine. And I'd love to see this grow, and we would obviously love to support in any way we can. So, yeah, thank you very much for your time, and yeah, I would value any questions later on in the session. Thank you.
An absolutely inspirational story, and lots of lessons there that we can put into play, if we want to, into our playbook. We have the wildlife. We know that people come back for it, but are we doing what we should do? And we also know what we shouldn't do, but we continue doing it. Nevertheless, our discussion points have been laid by Vince. I think we have a lot to learn from what they have done. So let me call on my panel. Let me go take a seat and call on my panel, and we'll move on from there. Ladies and gentlemen, each of our panelists are experts in their own right. They're all very passionate about what they do and what they work for. And when we talk about wildlife, we're talking about not just wildlife on land, we're also talking about wildlife in the sea. And that is an ecosystem, a completely different ecosystem that very many people don't talk about, but it's a gold mine, it's a treasure trove out there. So let me first call on Dr. Sumit Pilapiti, a conservationist and environmentalist, to come up, followed by Dr. Asha DeVos, who's the founder and executive director of Ocean Swell. Mr. Priyantha Fernando, chairman of the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority. Mr. Chandana Surya Bandara, Director General, Department of Wildlife Conservation, Sri Lanka. And Sharon Atapattu Tisera, owner and operator of Hideaway Villa, Arugambe. Vince, would you like to come up and sit with us and listen to what we have to say? Because then maybe you can wrap up something for us once we are done with the panel. Ladies, gentlemen, we've all heard what Vince has had to say. We also know where our tourism and biodiversity conservation stands at this point of time. So let me ask each of you, within 5 minutes, to reflect on the current status of biodiversity conservation and the integral role it plays in Sri Lanka's tourism efforts. Basically, the good, bad, and the ugly. And Sumit, I'd like you to start first.
Thank you. I would first like to thank Vince for his wonderful presentation, and I think we in Sri Lanka have a lot to learn from the experience that Vince shared with us. Sri Lanka has the highest biodiversity per unit area in Asia, right? And we seem pretty proud to say that Sri Lanka is a biodiversity hotspot. I, for one, am quite ashamed to say that Sri Lanka is a biodiversity hotspot, because when we say it is a hotspot, we are saying that our biodiversity is threatened. And we are doing nothing to really conserve the biodiversity in this country. Unfortunately, most governments don't think on the long term like you suggested, particularly when it comes to conservation issues. So we have problems with governments to allocate money to the authorities who have the mandate for conservation to actually invest in conservation. So I feel rather than talking about why countries should be investing in conservation, even though there's a very strong argument for investing in conservation, regardless of tourism. For one thing, if we want to develop as a country, we need ecosystem services for development. And ecosystem services are greater in more biodiverse ecosystems. So if I were a policymaker in this country, I would make biodiversity conservation a development priority, not a conservation priority, because without biodiversity conservation, development will not take place. Having said that, to try to ensure that the authorities allocate adequate funding for biodiversity conservation, if we can show that we can earn a lot of money from wildlife conservation or conservation tourism, then there is a tendency that governments might allocate more money towards it. So Sri Lanka has huge attributes that make Sri Lanka a unique location for wildlife tourism. I was reading a study in Asia. Sri Lanka comes #1 as a country where in a category called observability, that in a very short period you can observe wildlife. We have unique locations like Yala and Vilpattu that has the highest density of leopards in the world. We have the Minneria elephant gathering. Then Asha will talk to you about the whales. So we have beautiful rainforests. So the natural resource base is there. But what have we done with it? We have basically encouraged mass tourism into our national parks and forest reserves. And the danger of encouraging mass tourism is that the reviews, now today visitors come by looking at reviews. The reviews in Yala National Park, Minneria, Kaudulla, and most of our national parks is really bad. It's overcrowded. These are what the guests who come to our parks say. The parks are overcrowded, drivers are indisciplined, they drive too fast, they harass wildlife. Right? The thing that they say about harassing wildlife is a really significant thing, because there were social media campaigns against harassing wildlife, harassing elephants at Pinnavela. Foreign tourism in Pinnavela has drastically reduced. There were social media campaigns against elephant safaris or elephant riding in Sigiriya and Habarana. Today there is not one elephant to be found because the tourists didn't want to go. Now social media is saying that we are harassing the wildlife in our parks. So it's a matter of time before people stop coming into the parks. So if we really want to attract tourists, we have to have a paradigm shift in the way we do wildlife tourism, not the way we are going now. We have to try to encourage more high-end tourists and have a better quality of service rather than focus on the numbers coming in. Our target should be revenue targets, and we should be trying to attract high-quality tourists by providing better nature interpretation, because we just go to see animals, not to understand animals, not to really learn something from animals. And most of the tourists who come like to do that, but we are not geared to do that. But just because we want to go for wildlife tourism, high-end wildlife tourism, it doesn't happen overnight. We have to have, as Vince said, long-term thinking on that also. We have to set our parks in, train people, train guides, and set the parks on a course to go for high-end tourism. So that is something I think that we really should be focusing on. If we do that, I think Sri Lanka can achieve what Forbes magazine said in February 2023, that Sri Lanka can be the best wildlife safari destination outside Africa.
So thank you very much, Sumit. So let me now ask Asha to go dive deep into the sea.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Sumit, for stealing some of my points. So now I'm going to have to think outside the box. But I'm going to start again by thanking Vince. Very key points, which I will say I've written in my notebook, so it was really nice to see them reiterated. Long-term thinking, collective vision, right? So it's not just about one single person trying to succeed and make money. It's about how do you mobilize an entire community to move forward. That is the only way we see success, which is not at all something that we see here. A lot of what we see is very selfish. It's very self-driven. It's about individual or, a single organization trying to make the money, but not considering the overall ecosystem that they're working in, right? I mean, we know that our biodiversity is in a bad state, right? And when we think about our terrestrial environments, many of you will nod when I say that, because you've seen it. What most of you haven't seen is the state of our marine environment, the marine resources in our country. Sure, we have many marine resources, but we don't even actually know what we have. We don't even know the damage that we've done. There's a few of us who go and are in the front lines who see it and are trying to address the problem. That burden falls on a handful of us. And it's been very hard to translate it to the vast majority of people in Sri Lanka, right? Now, if we take, I'll give you an example, Hikkadua National Park, the only marine national park in our country. Possibly the easiest marine resource for us, tourism product for us to manage. Why? Because it's literally off the beach. But if any of you have been there, you will know that it is in no state to be even productive, right? The coral reefs are dead, right? We see very few fish. Even to date, there are people, tourists who come and walk all over those reefs. No one is stopping them, right? So that I want to give you that example as an example of what the state of our marine resources are like. If we can't protect what's on our doorstep, I don't know what hope we have for the other vast majority of ocean space around us, right? So I'm going to talk specifically about whale-related tourism in Sri Lanka, because obviously that's the space that I work in and that's the space I study. Whale-related tourism comes two types. One, we have legal but totally unmanaged whale watching. And the second thing we have is illegal swimming with whales, right? It's an industry that's growing in this country. Let me start with the whale watching itself, right? So y'all are maybe familiar with it, that it happens. Look, those animals are under severe stress. Ship strike, entanglement, ocean noise. There's a lot of stress and threats out in our ocean that many of the people in this room may not even have thought about, okay? But then on top of that, we go and throw in boats that are zipping around, trying to get as close as possible, trying to interact with the whales in ways that are incredibly harmful. Harassment. That's the word that you'll see a thread throughout the talks that we do, is that harassment of wildlife is what we see, right? I get emails from countless tourists almost every day saying, I want to see the whales in Sri Lanka, but I have heard it's such a mess that I don't want to go on those boats. Can I come out with you, right? It's sad. Word travels, right? So we are doing our part to destroy our own resource and our own opportunities, and that is really sad. Okay, so we have, and also it starts from the advertising itself, right? We've just finished a study which we're hoping to publish on the advertising and the marketing of the whale watching product in Sri Lanka. There is so much false information that it creates a very high expectation in tourists. They are expecting to come and see humpback whales leaping out of the water. We don't really see humpback whales in Sri Lanka, right? That is misleading tourism, but you're creating expectation. So until a tourist sees that, they are going to be disappointed, right? Because there's a big difference between expectation and what they're being given. Okay, and we guarantee 98% chance of seeing a blue whale. You cannot guarantee nature, my friends, right? We have to be realistic with how we market these products and be sensible. We are very cart before the horse kind of people, right? Even when I was watching in Sri Lanka, I was studying these whales before tourism started in the south. Then the industry was like, we must start whale watching. And I said, look, we need to do certain things. Number one, do a baseline assessment of what's out there. What are the threats and challenges those populations that we're going to focus on face? Once we understand that, let's do a carrying capacity assessment. How many boats can we go out there? Can we have out there? How many people can go out there to actually? I was a young 23-year-old marine scientist at that time. Nobody took me seriously because I was female and young, right? That's a standard thing. It is unfortunate because had we thought about that and put rules in place before, we wouldn't be trying to undo the damage. Today, it's like going out with the cowboys. You will have one whale and 30 boats sometimes chasing after this whale. I have seen mother-calf pairs being separated. That is really not ideal, right? So we have to have lots of different systems, and I'll have to talk about it a little bit longer, in a bit. But then I want to quickly go on to the illegal swimming with whales. Swimming with whales is illegal in this country, right? But if any of you are on Instagram, please go and look. Those people who run those operators know that nothing will happen to them. So they advertise freely. They advertise like it's a free product, right? It's a product that's endorsed by our country, which it's not. Okay? So how do we think about these things, right? These are bad practices. There's safety, huge safety concerns. My goodness, if you watch any of the videos of the swimming with whales industry in Sri Lanka, it is scary. Okay, they chased after whales, they throw people in the water. Why? Because it's illegal, so they're charging high amounts, and they have to guarantee the sighting to make sure that they have a satisfied customer who go and tell another friend to go with this operator, right? That's what we're seeing. So the problem here is that now I am in the face. I go down south to Mirissa, I go to the harbour, and those whale watch operators who are running the legal but unmanaged industry are coming and getting aggressive with me and saying, y'all are busy trying to manage us, but what about the illegal activities, right? So you can see how there can be conflict as a result, building, okay? So what we have this, we can go on, right, and say we have unique products, we have amazing resources. Of course, we have it, but we are so busy looking at numbers, right, quantity over quality. We are like, how many millions of people can we get to Sri Lanka? Now, on Vince's numbers, they are saying roughly 23,000 square kilometers, 40,000 visitors, right? That's a third of our country. But what are our numbers? How does that translate in Sri Lanka? We want millions in 3 times that space. Because we are counting numbers of feet walking on these spaces. We are not talking about how much is being spent, how much is being invested, right? It is much more complicated than that. And I think we can do a much better job. But we cannot keep trying to like basically put the cart out and then try to figure out where the horse goes and then try to catch the cart, right? This is a mess that we are in. It's an unfortunate situation. I think there are things that we can do to change it. And I wish we could all come together to actually brainstorm, to pause, stop expanding, stop looking at how do we grow tourism and stop commodifying every centimeter of this land in our country.
Thank you, Asha. So we've heard land, we've heard sea. I'm going to now ask Priyantha.
Thanks, Savitri. Firstly, Vince, very grateful to you for making a very educative presentation from which we can learn a lot. Also, Sumit and Asha has set the ball rolling, and they have spoken on many points where I am left to deviate and approach it from a different aspect. Okay, we have been in planned tourism for over 55 years now. We have had many plans, master plans coming, strategical plans coming, and so on. But what have we achieved? Talking of biodiversity and conservation, tourism relies on biodiversity and conservation. That's why tourists come over here. It's the nature, wildlife, the wilderness that we offer, and so on. So how best can we interrelate all this and have the protective mechanism? It all boils down to sustainability. Preserve, conserve, and manage for the betterment of the current communities as well as the future communities to come. So we have to start somewhere. Let's look at the wildlife and look at Yala National Park. As Sumit quite correctly pointed out, over-visitation has done a lot of damage. Isn't that we don't know how to manage flows into a park? We do know how to manage them, but unfortunately there are many interferences coming in between. I'm sure Chandana will touch on it later, but if you take Yala, over-visitation is one thing, and if you look at the political interference that the authorities have to face, it's another aspect that has to be handled. So just having plans is not enough. Also, when you look at biodiversity and conservation, we look at the rural communities, the indigenous communities. They intermingle with the immediate environment. They have a major role to play. There are levels, we have to educate them on how best they could make use of this resource that is there through tourism and usher benefits for themselves as well. These are the areas that tourism has to look into. We are in the process of bringing in many changes. Of course, moving forward, we will be having an overall master plan. I should thank ADB because they have supported us right throughout. And also, talking of wildlife, now we are about to enter into an agreement with the Wildlife Department where we will develop Wasgamu National Park, bringing in the communities, bringing in the stakeholders, the different departments, and also ensuring that the flows into the park are limited and there are benefits for the immediate community as well. Talking of working with the communities as well as the stakeholders, if we look at the Yala Wildlife Zone, we have already come into an agreement. It's about to be signed with all the operators there, about 7 hotels in operation in total. Once the 2 hotels which are under construction are completed, we'll have a room capacity of about 650 rooms, where they will take responsibility for managing that specific area and also ensuring that the communities also benefit. In the plans, they will also take care of the asset, that's the national park, and support them as well as they move forward. We are also working on destination management organizations. We are working on overall sustainability. Under sustainability, we have certified over 135 SMEs in hospitality as well as DMCs, and also the first sustainable destination, which is going to be Sigiriya, will be certified by end of this year. This is all to protect the biodiversity and usher in an era where the immediate communities as well as the stakeholders will take responsibility in moving forward. So as we go along, I'll add more. I think that's enough for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Chandana. Sorry, thank you, Priyanta. We move to Chandana. Yours is a very responsible and integral role in this, in the biodiversity conservation arena. Just tell us exactly what has been happening. What do you think needs to be done at this point?
Actually, the question was to have a look around the biodiversity conservation and its integral role. As far as the Department of Wildlife Conservation and its mandate is concerned, we are performing a part of biodiversity conservation as if we consider the entire aspect of biodiversity conservation is concerned, because this partitioning will be beneficial for us in the future discussions. But I have to reiterate that we are doing a part of biodiversity conservation in the name of wildlife conservation. In that sector, we do ecosystem conservation. If we go deeper into the definition of the biodiversity, there will be landscapes, species and genes, but we are not touching the genes. But when we consider the species, there are only few focal animals are interested as far as the visitors are concerned. Their interest is on several focal animals, but not the others. When we consider the visitors as a whole, their interest is to the landscape is there. So whether we have to distinguish whether we are doing the biodiversity conservation or the biodiversity related tourism, or whether we are going, we are doing wildlife tourism, and that is the benefits, the income or revenue generated through the wildlife tourism will be beneficial for the biodiversity conservation. That is my opinion, because at the moment, the biodiversity conservation, the part of biodiversity conservation is performed by the Department of Wildlife Conservation. From that, we get benefits from the wildlife tourism. Then it will benefit the biodiversity conservation. So with that point, I like to stop here. For further discussions, we can in detail discuss in detail. Yeah.
Thank you. Yep, I think we have to discuss all this in detail in a little while. But let me hear from Sharon.
I'm not even sure what to bring up anymore. Thank you, Vince, for absolutely inspiring, everything in, as far as what you brought up was so prevalent, and also, incredibly inspiring to us here. We're sitting on a land that is an absolute, gem. Sri Lanka has so much going for it, and yet, we just don't seem to be able to harness everything that we potentially could harness from this incredible nation we live in. Our biggest national treasure, I think, is our wildlife, our biodiversity, in the ocean, on land. I've lived overseas for a very, very long time, like 23 years. I spent time in Hawaii, had incredible, experiences in the water, but I always crave to come back here and put my roots or live back in Sri Lanka, where my roots were very much a part of this land, mainly because of the elephants, I would say. I live now in Arugambe, which is on the east coast, and a part of the island that is probably, not as popular, other than for the surf, which is has been marketed like crazy, and Arugambe is one of the 10 best surfing destinations in the world at the moment. But more than the surf, I think for me, it's the wilderness. It's the wild part of this country. It's raw, it's wild, it's incredibly beautiful, and we've had it to ourselves for, quite a long time. But now with more and more, people coming in, and the type of tourists coming in, we see it being decimated and desecrated right before our eyes. And this is a huge problem, actually. With no really enforced laws, and just absolute, ignorance, I think, in some ways. Tourists are walking up to wild elephants. We find, even in Kumana, basically, we don't have enough of guides in the national park. Vehicles are going in without any trackers. People are getting down from vehicles, all of this kind of indiscipline, which we are in desperate need of. We are, there's this whole thing between the DWC and forest. Even with that we see on a daily basis people just taking over, parts of the wilderness that they shouldn't even be in. How do we even get the support, to try and rectify these issues? Basically, I'm on the ground, I'm witnessing this, I'm calling the forest department, I'm put onto the archaeological department, because they say that bit of land is not, doesn't have anything to do with us. It actually has to do with the archaeological department. So it's these land grabs. It's, basically, waste management, illegal dumping. Yes, we have all these hotels that are coming up, but we don't have the infrastructure. It just goes back to the infrastructure on the East Coast at the moment to support as many hotels coming in, or small SMEs, or whatever they call them. We have such a incredible opportunity to get this right, and I'm hugely grateful for it even, coming up at this point and being invited to this platform to discuss this, or to be given the opportunity to ask for help, really, from government organizations to just give us the support to do it right, to get it right and to do the right thing, not only by, obviously, the government, but also the people who visit us and everyone around us. Because, at the moment, it's just all about greed. It's all about, just let's do it, right now, for the here and now. We're lucky, actually, on one hand, just simply because we have a season. As Arugambe has been marketed as a surfing destination, we have a 6-month season, and basically the earth is renewed in the other 6 months. I shoot myself in the foot as a business owner saying that, just simply because it's a struggle making it from one season to the other. But at least, I see that the environment is renewed, and for that I'm grateful.
Thanks. So thank you, Sharon. Before I go to the next round of questions, just to let you know that on your tables is a QR code, which will take you to the form to access so that you can send us questions. And also for everyone joining virtually, the link to the form has been posted on the Zoom chat for all of you if you'd like to send in any questions. I'm sure there are loads of questions. I do, and I'm looking at the clock and thinking we won't have time, but it's okay. We will start somewhere. This is for both Sumit and Asha. Couple of keywords I've been hearing: indiscipline, illegal, lack of laws, lack of regulation, and also the problem of not having an authority or a department actually looking over everything. There seems to be a disconnect in everything. Taking all these keywords into context, both of you, in your practical experience, why is it that we are just focusing on, as the DG said, on only the animals or who the tourists want? What about the rest of them? Doesn't the ecosystem go a 360-degree?
Well, see, the problem is some of the issues that came up as indiscipline and all that is largely because we, up to the end of the war, wildlife tourism was very well managed. Then, because each vehicle that goes into the park was accompanied by a wildlife department tracker. But with the exponential rise in tourism, it is impossible for the wildlife department to have a tracker in each vehicle because they don't have enough staff. For example, in Yala, during the period of 20th December to 31st December, sometimes you have 800 vehicles. The entire wildlife department has about 1,300 staff, if I'm not mistaken. Right? So that number. So it's impossible to have 800. We made the mistake of allowing safari drivers to go in without a guide. Having been for a short while in the wildlife department, I also take responsibility that we should have trained the drivers before sending them in. But now the department has requested certain NGOs to help Wildlife and Nature Protection Society and the Federation of Environmental Organizations to try to help in training drivers. And I have been involved with both organizations in training the drivers. See, we all like to blame only the drivers, but the drivers are only one part of the problem. The hoteliers are a problem, the visitors are a problem, the wildlife department is a problem, all of us are a problem. Because we in Sri Lanka, particularly the elites from Colombo, we all want rules enforced in the park, but not onto ourselves. The rules have to be enforced to everybody else, because I have seen enough. I spend a lot of time in the parks. I have seen enough occasions where people who have been arguing with me saying that there should be stronger rules, breaking the rules when they are in the park. So we all have to start setting an example. We have to stop breaking rules. We have to, when we go into the park, we should never break a rule. We should not put pressure on the drivers, because the drivers during training say that, well, we are indisciplined because the guests want us to do this. If we refuse to do it, they will go to some other driver. So we want our business, so we continue doing it. So I think it is a collective responsibility of everybody, the department, tourism, for example, now for some people talk about limiting rooms, limiting the number of vehicles in Yala. If let's say the department decides to limit to 100 vehicles, the tourism industry will be up in arms, saying that we have over 1,000 hotel rooms in the surrounding area, we have invested all that money, so can you please increase the number of vehicles? So we have to start by planning better. Now, the cases of overcrowded parks, it has to be managed in a different way from the others. The low-hanging fruit, I think DG and I have been discussing this also, is to try to put limits on non-overcrowded parks. So if you put limits on non-overcrowded parks now, the tourism sector won't develop more than the limit. If there's a limit of, let's say, 75 vehicles into Wasgamur, you're not going to have a 500-room hotel or a 300-room hotel coming up there. So that will automatically control the tourism development. Then we really have to go, discipline is a huge problem because it's like a free-for-all inside parks. So we have to make sure that the drivers are trained, which is going on, but the drivers being trained alone is not adequate. Rules have to be enforced by the authorities, and we, the guests, have to be much more responsible by not putting pressure on the drivers to do the wrong thing. So if we start changing ourselves, then I think we can change this. We like to blame everybody else, not ourselves. So I'm saying let's start with each one of us who goes to parks. For us to try to make sure that we don't break the rules and we try to conform, then automatically everything will start moving in the right direction.
Asha?
So I agree with everything Sumit has said, but I'd like to also add that we have a huge communications and marketing problem. So in 2017 or 2018, I sat on another tourism panel by the Australian High Commission having similar conversations because we do a lot of conversing in this country. And in that, they had brought an Australian consultant who works for Australian tourism. And one of the things he revealed was that they have about 3,000 trained, this is back in the day, 3,000 trained tour operators across the world who have a unified message about what Australia offers. Now in Sri Lanka, right, my goodness, undercutting happens, right? Because if this person is like, I can give it to 5,000, that one wants to give at 1,000. When you sell it at 1,000, then of course it's so cheap that you can't make enough money that you're going to behave even worse than the person on 5,000, right? There's a lot of issues. So I think we need to start with, first of all, being courageous, right? As a nation, we have a lot to offer and we need to stop being like, Ane, but the tourists won't come. So we better give whatever we can free, right? That is our attitude. And that is where we are destroying ourselves, right? We have to have the courage to say, this is what we stand for. As a nation, this is our unified message. We do not endorse activities that harass the wildlife in our country. The wildlife, that is actually the natural resource that belongs to the nation and its residents, right? It doesn't belong to the outsider. Right now, we act as if the tourist is the one who owns what we have in our country. Right? We have to flip that because we live here. These are our resources. We have every right, right, to stand up. We need to have the courage to stop bad practices. We have to give the training in a way that even the tour operators or the guides are filled with that courage because they know there's backup in the system that will stand for them if they say no to a tourist who wants them to go and charge behind an animal. But right now they don't feel that. They feel like if they don't do it, that man will go to the next jeep driver. Why? Because you can get a different price or someone is willing to do it at a lower price. But if we unify our message, if we unify our pricing, if we have one single product that we are selling to the world, what is Sri Lanka? Who are we? What do we believe in? What do we want for our future generations, our Sri Lankan future generations? I'm not bothered about tourist future generations. Tourism is a fickle product and we know that better than anyone else. Every time something happens in this country, our tourism collapses, right? Then we're desperately trying to revive it. What happens is that because of this extra infrastructure that's built in boom periods, we have so much unused infrastructure. Drive along our coastline, get off the highway once again, since we are so used to the highway now. Drive our coastal route, look around. What percentage of those hotels are functioning now? Look at that ugly infrastructure we're left with because there was no planning. There was no carrying capacity assessments. I know that in this country there have been. I know in Pasikuda there was a carrying capacity assessment done. I know in Calcutta that was done. How many hotels can that area accommodate? It was all asked for, it was done, but then ignored. Right? Now we have all these hotels and nobody going there. Why can't we draw it back? Why can't we think about, let's build spaces that are well thought out, that have ripple effects in the community. It's not about number of feet, because the ecological footprint of the tourist that's coming into our country is massive. Now we are catering to checkbox tourists, right? Someone who says, I want a picture with a whale, so I'm just going whale watching. They don't actually care, right? There is no educational component in our marine tourism. Right? We sell the blue whale, then seasonal, there are seasons, of course, there's no guarantee, right? Nature, no guarantee. These blue whales also, they don't need to be at our doorstep all the time. If their food shifts further offshore, they go offshore. Then the industry is like, my goodness, there are no blue whales in Sri Lanka. Why? The problem is they have told everyone that they are going to guarantee 100% blue whale sighting. Why are we not selling ocean experiences? There is so much to see when you go out there. I have been talking about this forever, right? You can tell I'm frustrated. But this is my point. The way we market, our pride in ourselves, our courage, our self-confidence is so low as a nation when it comes to these things. And that, I think, is the fundamental thing we need to change. And I will tell you that I don't know how it's going to happen with our adult generations, but even our education system doesn't inculcate pride. And we can change it from there. We must change it from there, because we need to have a different future for our Sri Lankans. And if we cater to the needs of our people, if we prioritize our people, if we keep tourist-free zones where these areas are allowed to, be what they really are, we don't sell every piece of land and water, if we don't see dollar signs only, that's when we are going to see success. But as we are going right now, we aren't. And I don't think any of us in the room want that, right? So we need to rethink, we need to be courageous, we need to stop expanding, growing, we need to stop giving into corruption, which is a huge thing. That's where all these wild spaces get taken up. We need to think about what we want for our future. And let us lead and not let the tourists lead.
Thank you, Asha. Priyanta, piggybacking on both what Sumit and Asha said, you mentioned a plan that is going to be implemented soon. Does that plan include any of what they were talking about?
Definitely, Savitri, and also I'm in total agreement with what has been stated. Yes, but unfortunately, there's an oversupply situation which has been exacerbated over the last three to 4 years because of the country's situation. In addition to the room capacity in the planned sector, there's about 60 to 70% more rooms in the informal sector. That's where the impact is created, what Asha was mentioning. They don't maintain standards, quality, and so on, and it's having a major impact on the informal sector. Now we have to really work backwards from where we are, because we cannot isolate them and say, okay, we are going to disregard all of you all, but we are moving forward. But we have legislation and we have the power to bring in the informal sector to fall within the formal sector. Also, in moving forward, we have to identify exactly what numbers we need, what's the yield that we are looking at, what are the target segments that we will be having. We just cannot go out there and say, no, you're not supposed to come, it's this particular segment. But there are controlling mechanisms that could be brought in by area, by destination, and so on. If you take a country like Bhutan, they do it very well. And there are many other examples where the biodiversity conservation has come in and control flows into that area, but also ensuring that the overall yield has been improved. If we try to take area by area, there are some areas where the average spend per tourist is very high, but there are certain areas which are very low. But in moving forward, we will have to have a structured accommodation sector, which means from the backpackers, the leisure traveler, the people who come for specialized areas like marine tourism and so on, who will belong to the high-end tourist category. All of them needs to be accommodated. But as we move forward with new plans, we will have to go in for segmentation, identify exactly whom we want to have, go in for target marketing in the major generating markets, and ensure that we cater for those segments. Also, it's not only international tourists, we have to think of the domestic tourist as well, because the biodiversity and the assets that we have belongs to the locals as well. So in moving forward, we cannot disregard the local, create opportunity for the locals as well. Though it's not accounted for, the domestic tourist movements will be over 7 million tourist movements for a year. During the periods that we had trouble, most of these hotels were supported by the domestic tourists. Also, Savitri, I should say, the major problem is we tend to work in watertight compartments, mainly the departments, the ministries, and so on. And now the interministerial committee has been set up. I hope that there will be an improvement, where there will be interaction between ministries, departments, and so on, understanding each other's needs and what has to be done in moving forward. This, unfortunately, did not happen in the past, which has left us with many questions to be answered right now. And also, as I mentioned earlier, looking at plans which are there, it's only about 30 to 40% that has been implemented. So it's just been confined to paper. There are experts coming over, we have local experts contributing, but their voice is not taken account of. And this is the unfortunate part. Now, even in tourism, biodiversity is very, very important in moving forward. We have to think of climate change. 70% of our superstructure borders the coastal line. With climate change, rising sea levels could create certain impacts. Inland, there will be many other impacts being created. All this needs to be looked into, and overall sustainability has to be there if we are to move forward in tourism. Of course, on the positive side, even the tourists are more educative. They will visit destinations which are going in for sustainability and biodiversity conservation. So on that note, I think there's a lot more to be done as we move forward.
Well, ideally, that's the tourists we should be attracting. Unfortunately, though, Instagram and TikTok have taken over, and then come the jumping on the whales is more like it. Yep. So maybe again, going back to Asha's story, advertising and marketing plays a huge role. Chandana, just want to ask you, in the name of development, there has been a lot of encroachment in the wildlife parks, roads being cut, mangroves being demarcated for aquaculture, unsustainable projects. From a department's point of view, how much of teeth do you have to stop these, or to make an impact and make sure that our biodiversity is not threatened in any way?
For that, as a regulatory organization, we have a mandate of considering all the aspects, development, conservation, and everything. When we have to face such situations where the threats are concerted towards the wildlife resources, we have to take the actions according to the available legal provisions. Whenever there are situations arising from outside threatening to the wildlife resources, we have the procedures to follow that we are following. The results are being drawn with the after that as a result of the proper following of those procedures. So if we consider such situations, there may be EIAs done, there may be the environmental assessment done, and there may be some other discussions held. Through all those scrutinies, we have to have come into a consensus whether this project or the impact will be detrimental to the well-being of the protected area or the wildlife resource. So based on those situations, based on those findings, we are taking decisions. And so we have to follow the procedures. We have to go with the available legal provisions. Beyond that, we are not going. All the decisions have taken based on those available legal provisions. So the result may be sometimes looks bad, but they have all the decisions have been taken according to the law.
Just let me ask you also, what is the, would you like to,
Can I, as a former DG, I think DG is in trouble who can't, he can't say certain things that I'm going to say. While I having been for a short time as DG Wildlife, most of the wildlife officials are very committed to protect the protected areas. They do not like encroachments. They do not like illegal activities taking place. Every time the department tries to file a case, there is some politician who interferes in it and stops them from doing that. As a public servant, he is not in a position to say that in a public forum like this. So I want to tell that to you because that is what happens. So they are pressurized really badly. And if they were not, if I left the public service saying that there is no environment for a professional to act. I have a lot of regard for public servants because the pressure that they are under. And if you can get political interference out of the system, Sri Lanka will prosper. All the problems that happen is due to political interference.
well, that might be in utopia, but yep. Yeah, Sharon, what practical difficulties are there in, from a private sector point of view, in actually ensuring what your passion of conserving biodiversity while also marrying it to that tourism area, from just from a private sector point of view, having to work with the public sector and make sure things happen?
As I said, I mean, the infrastructure is what's lacking, you know, most of all. I mean, we've you know, asked for help in these particular areas, but it's because we're kind of at the end of the road on the East Coast in a lot of ways. You know, it's a part of the country that hasn't really had a lot of development in, and that's a good thing on one hand. But on the other, you know, with the influx of people coming into the country now, and particularly to the East Coast, where really, you know, we need the help. We as at Hideaway, particularly, you know, when we have guests checking in, we always give them a briefing. You know, we tell them, please, you know, we have elephants on our doorstep, literally, a kilometer away, 3 kilometers away. It's such a unique place in that, you know, yes, it's been advertised or marketed as a surfing destination, but, you know, people are coming back with, you know, tuk-tuks loaded with surfboards, and there are elephants on the side of the road. You know, there aren't many places in the world that has such a unique thing to offer. But, you know, what they don't realize is that these are wild animals, you know, and they go up to them. Literally, they're walking up to these animals, taking photos of them, you know, grabbing these Instagrammable photos, which is just, it's crazy. So we tell our guests, you know, as much as possible, we educate them and we tell them, please, you know, try and go out with operators that are a little bit more responsible in the parks, that even if you're going out on your own, be mindful that, you know, after a certain time, you shouldn't be on these roads on your own, because you can meet up with a wild elephant. I mean, you know, a person was killed 2 months ago, actually, walking along the beaches. There are pine forests, and they came up on an elephant very suddenly, and the elephant was in must and, you know, reacted, basically, and a person died. Whose fault was it at the end of the day? You know, the elephant obviously is going to be, you know, blamed for picking this person up and killing it. But, you know, why were those people there to begin with? You know, so basically, you know, what I really, more than anything, would like to say is, let's not milk the cow until it's dry. You know, we have an incredible opportunity to do the right thing. Let's prioritize it. Let's make conservation a huge priority in this country, because it's we have such a gift here, you know, and rather than exploiting it, let's do the right thing. We are all interconnected at the end of the day. We are from the earth. We're going back to the earth. Let's live it now as they do in Africa. You know, I've had the privilege of actually visiting Rwanda, South Africa, and South Africa as well. And those parks, the discipline and everything else that goes with it, you know, to do the right thing by the animals, to live in harmony with the animals is amazing. Why can't we bring that back home, especially living in a Buddhist culture, you know? So, yeah, I really don't know what else I can say other than, you know, I'm here. We'd love to contribute in any way we can as part of the private sector. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good luck with it.
Thanks, Sharon. Given that Priyantha has to leave in a little while, could I just ask one question from the audience, even though we're not opening it up right now? What is stopping the government of Sri Lanka, the SLTDA and the SLTDA, from imposing a temporary moratorium on any new hotel development near Yala, Vilpattu, Horton Plains and others until thorough carrying capacity studies are completed to inform for sustainable planning?
Well, it's been given thought. It's been given thought, and within Yala, with the wildlife department, we have an agreement on the development that will take place within the zone. So we will not permit any development to take place outside the blueprint or the master plan that is in place. Also in other areas, also we are very particular. We are looking at flows into the area, the carrying capacities, the impacts it's having on the community, environment and so on in granting approval. It's not only Yala, even in other areas where we are very particular, and also right now, as we are trying to target high-end tourists in time to come, we are very particular that we approve certain type of accommodation to be allowed and permitted.
We'll bid you adieu, Priyantha, because I think you have a meeting to leave for. So thank you very much for joining us today, but we will continue the discussion.
Thanks, Savitri. Thanks all.
Sumit, one thing I would like to ask you, Vince brought up two aspects which I think is somewhat neglected in Sri Lanka when it comes to tourism. One is the role the community plays, because that's a very good example he brought on. And the other is bringing in children into the equation and getting them to understand about conservation, about wildlife.
Well, I think it's a global practice. Global best practice suggests that protected areas are not sustainable unless the local community benefits from it. So, which means you have to bring in the local community and they have to get some benefit from it. I have been, as much as I have problems with the jeep drivers, I have been supportive of jeep drivers because that is the only direct benefit the local communities get from our national parks at this point. So that's why I have been a bit opposed to putting limits on them. But we have to go beyond that. We have to try to integrate the local community to benefit from protected areas. Now, in countries like Nepal, a certain percentage of the revenue goes into a buffer zone fund for the development of the buffer zone community, right? Because they are trying to build a dependence between the buffer zone community and the national park, because most of the poaching and everything is done from the buffer zone communities. If the buffer zone communities are benefiting from the park, the tendency for them to want to do those illegal activities is much less. So in Sri Lanka, we have to seriously start considering that. Now, with assistance from ADB, and the Wildlife Department is seriously considering around Wasgamua to see whether we can get community guides to be trained so that they are not employed by the government, but they will accompany vehicles and the guests have to pay the community. So some direct benefit to the community. Also, in many parks that you have elephants outside the park at certain times of the year, why not have community-based elephant viewing tourism, right? Because the direct benefit goes to them, right? So there are lots of ways like that we have to try to bring the community in. And some of Vince's examples were really great because they really seem to be working with the community. So communities have to be brought in. About your question on children, I of course really feel that our generation is a lost cause. We can't really get our generation to do what is right. So at least let's start focusing on the children and hope that the next generation might be a little more environmentally conscious and more concerned about conservation in this country than what we are. Because I don't see, for the last 30, 40 years, I have also been trying to see whether we could change attitudes, but it seems to be a huge challenge. So maybe the next generation might be the better hope than now.
Yeah, it's me. Okay. So I just want to add, yes, I believe wholeheartedly in children and their ability. I mean, especially today's kids are so much more aware of what's going on around them. They're more exposed to things, but their awareness and their consideration is a lot different. I just want to point out that, like, look, when I was 18, I told people I want to be a marine biologist. Sri Lankans thought I was crazy. They were like, there is no scope for a marine biologist in this country, right? We're an island. I don't know how many of you have noticed, but I certainly had noticed that by that point, right? This is what the problem for us is when it comes to our marine spaces. Our lives end at the shoreline. There's nothing beyond that. It's just a dumping ground. That's how people, extraction and dumping, that's how we have seen the ocean historically, right? I had during COVID, some of the textbooks went up online. So we did a quick analysis of what about marine education? Do we talk about it in our schools? Local curriculum. There are pictures of jellyfish, and they'll say jellyfish, but there's no reference to the jellyfish in this whole page. We don't teach them about monsoons. Our entire climate is driven by our monsoons. If kids don't know that, then where do we start, right? We teach kids to pass exams, right? But what about teaching kids respect, empathy, not just for other people, but for everything around them, right? These are things that characters, we need to think about how do we bring that into our school curriculum as well. Because this has to be done en masse. It can't be isolated like groups going and talking to isolated schools. This is an en masse shift in our mindset, right? I believe strongly in all of this stuff. And we try to do our part in small ways. And I would encourage you to at least check out some of the work we're doing or trying to do to try to shift how people see our marine environment, how kids engage with it, and also how they see themselves as heroes in these spaces, because that's also a very important thing, right? We keep kids out and we think we know the best, we know so much, right? But we don't. As we get older, we also, deteriorate, and unfortunately, our decision makers are at the point when it's past our prime. And that is the reality. So how do we bring these kids in and how do we shift the system? We can do it. It's not impossible. But we have to have the endorsement to go ahead and do it at a much larger scale.
Also, if I can add something to it, I think there have been many instances in other countries that I have read where children are able to influence the parents' behavior. Children have influenced parents who are poachers to stop poaching. So things like that we can do if we really are able to convince our children.
Adding a subject to the curriculum might also help. Vince, you've been seated listening to everything that's been said. What are your reflections?
I think the first thing is that I've heard this before. This is not unique, and I think the first part that I need to emphasize is that the fact that you're having these discussions and you have people that are passionate about it means you're on the right track. All I can speak about is lessons learned from the countries that we're operating in. And I'll say outright that nowhere in any of the countries have I seen, when it comes to the protection of protected areas, of fragile ecosystems, have I seen either one government department or one private operator or one community doing it on their own. It doesn't happen that way. And I think it's very important that you separate the planning from the doing. And the planning is critical, and that's the role of government, and that puts those guardrails in place that we don't make mistakes that we can't come back from. But we get to a point where planning can only take you so far before the doing has to start happening. And then you have to ask the question, is the environment welcoming parties? Is it welcoming partners that are able to do? In Africa, we've learned the hard lesson. We lost national parks. You guys are talking about pressure on national parks. In Africa, we lost national parks to the point where governments were not able to manage them anymore, and we've seen the rise of new organizations like African Parks who are now being called in by governments to rescue these national parks and bring them back. And I think there's a very easy shortcut here, and that's to find out what entities like African Parks are doing now to recover, because that gives you probably the key performance areas for how to keep a protective area alive, because this has come from an area that's been lost. And I think in this case, government to plan, and then making an environment that is attractive to the right kind of operators. If you get the right kind of operators, the environment is set for the right kind of tourists and the right kind of suppliers of those tourists. It's not going to happen by planning for it only. You need to start doing it. And if that means starting, I mentioned the example of Mombo. In the Okavango Delta, that was a single camp. There wasn't a policy on how tourism should be done. It started with one camp and spread out so that people could keep referring back to that camp and saying, well, can't we do it like they're doing it? It seems to be working there. And that grows a lot quicker than referring back to a policy, which becomes outdated because things change so fast. So I just want to stress making those clear differences between planning and doing, and that it needs to be integrated.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Vince. There is a question for you, but I'll take that a little later. Just want to ask Chandana, question from the audience. Can we do this round of questions or do it kind of fast so that we can get in as much as possible into this session? 7 major national parks in the country make more than 7 billion rupees annually. How much money is diverted back to park management, conservation efforts, and benefiting the adjacent communities, as well as addressing the domestic and foreign tourist facilities?
Actually, it depends on the actions plan that we prepare based on the management plans. We all, many of the national parks have management plans, even though those are, some are outdated. We use all those management plans for selecting the actions that to be done in the financial year. For that financial year, we will be planning several activities that are needed for that year. For that, we can draw that money, the income that we can divert that funds to the maybe to the community, for the benefit of the community, maybe for development of visitor services infrastructure, maybe for habitat enrichment, many aspects.
And it's being done?
Yeah, at the moment we are doing.
Okay, thank you. Sharon? Sri Lanka has dozens of small-scale, privately owned wildlife tourism operators positioned at different price points. Exclusivity, as indicated by wilderness, means limited access for operators. Are we potentially excluding most of them from this higher value form of tourism? And how do you suggest handling Sri Lanka's domestic market if Sri Lanka pivots exclusively to high-end wildlife tourism?
I mean, I don't think we should only have high-end tourism. I think everyone needs to have the opportunity to be a part of our biodiversity and all of it. It's just like going back to what Sumit said as well. You know, it's a discipline. It's not being so entitled to think that only we should have access to it. But I also disagree with, busloads of visitors going to these parks and decimating them. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we've taken, bags into, garbage bags into these parks to pick up plastic. Why are people allowed to do this? It's also because, like in Kumana, for instance, I'm talking mainly about the East Coast just simply because that's where I am, and those are the parks that I'm going into, obviously, the ones on the East Coast. It's, if there are no guides going in, or there are no trackers who are trained, then how can any of that be achieved? You know what I'm saying? It's just like, we can only do as much as we can do. At some point, we need the help of the department as well. So, there has to be a balance in all things. We need our local tourists, of course, we do. I don't agree with, feeding the elephants on the Buttala-Kataragama road, which I'm doing constantly on my own, and I'm witnessing that and going absolutely crazy every time I see a bag being thrown out for the elephants to feed on. I pass those animals all the time, those elephants all the time. I've never had an issue with them. People are it's out of fear, really, more than anything else. They feel that they can't pass by unless they give the elephant a watermelon. They have caused this issue, And now people are being charged, people are being harassed by the elephants, but we started it. We started the problem.
Okay, Vincent, can you explain how concessions play a part in your work? Currently, the practice is for the government of Sri Lanka entities to give properties like guest houses out on lease rather than concession areas. Please explain the benefits that can come from a concession approach.
Yeah, I think it comes back down to the product that you're wanting to offer. Firstly, so in the high value, low density model, you are basically protecting and selling magic moments. These are moments where charismatic species do things that are going to change people's lives and hook them to travel again. That is essentially your product. As I mentioned in the presentation, there's only so much you can do in your camp to make it appealing and to make it attractive. Your product extends into the area where you operate. That is essentially what you're selling. And in order to do that, you need to have some control over that area. Having a camp and then going into a public area where you don't have control limits the way you can improve that product. Your product is not just the camp, it's the extended part. So what a concession does is it offers the operator the ability to start controlling that area, keeping it biodiversity healthy, keeping it clean, keeping it safe, and that's part of the product. And you can't do that by relying on someone else who doesn't have a vested interest in your business to do that. So it's really about protecting a product.
Thank you. Yeah. Arsha, do we need expanded formal marine protected areas to conserve our ocean wildlife, or do we just need more awareness?
It's a great question. 0.33% of something ridiculous like that of our marine areas are protected officially. But are they really protected? Right? So I'm not a fan of just designating areas and saying, we protected it so we can pat ourselves on the back and we can get on. Right? I believe if we are designating an area, we need to invest in that area and actually make a difference. So again, I can talk about Hikkadu. I can talk about all the marine protected areas around the island. We have some, very, very few. Certainly, we could expand that. It's complicated. We have to design them in a way that there are no-use zones, but also there are sort of multi-use zones. And it's more complicated than it seems. But what I will say is I'm far more interested in seeing us do a much better job on places that we've declared protection, right? What data has driven that protection? Are we protecting it at the status that it's supposed to be at? Now, as a national park, Hikkadu, seeing people walking on the coral reefs tells you something, right? And like I said, it's possibly the easiest to manage of all our marine protected areas because it's like there on the doorstep. There's a guard hut, there's a hut there also where people can actually apprehend people walking on the reef. But somehow it doesn't happen, right? So I think we can do a much better job in general. There's so many aspects to protecting our marine environment. It's vast. A lot of people will say, it's hard to enforce because it's so vast. How do we get out there? Our infrastructure is limited. I understand the problems. But I also think there has to be a willingness to want to do it. There are people who can help and support. I also wish that getting a research permit was as easy as getting a tourism permit in this country. Right? We jump through hoops. We have to justify every action. And what we do is actually trying to help to understand the products in this country, to support the development of the country. Right? So we need to start to think about what our priorities are. Right? How do we build our baselines? How do we build our knowledge? How do we understand what we have? How do we then, using that information, make better decisions? Then we can think about, where do we put these marine protected areas? What will work? How do we design them in a way that they will work? Rather than just saying, like pin the tail on the donkey, closing your eyes and then drawing circles around the ocean, being like, superb, it's protected, this is great. Right? So I am a very practical person in life as well, and I am all about walk the talk. Let's not just say that we are going to do it, let's do it and actually do it properly.
Thank you, Asha. So we're going to wrap up now, and I would like each of you to tell me or propose at least one practical step to start the process towards better utilization of our biodiversity within that concept of tourism, and how we can share responsibility in conservation efforts. So one practical step, let me start with Chandana.
The practical step would be the proper engagement of the tourism sector into the wildlife conservation. I was intended to discuss that aspect at this forum, but it was not. But I should reiterate that that was the aspect that we should have discussed. Otherwise, pointing out all those uglies and those things, I think no value for if we are considering the betterment of the tourism industry and the wildlife conservation in Sri Lanka. So we have to go for more precise and very precise discussion regarding the what we call how we can catch up the losses, and how we can go forward with the benefits that we can draw from the wildlife conservation and the tourism. So that discussion should be initiated in no time. That is the first step that we have to do.
Thank you. Vince, is there anything you would like to add to this, as in a practical step, now that you've heard our story? A practical step we need to start off?
Obviously, I believe, based on what I've seen, that the product you have is very similar to many of the products in Africa. A high-value, low-density model can work here. A practical step would be to start and test it. It doesn't have to be at the expense of anything that already exists. I believe you have many wonderful protected areas, but just as we mentioned with the Mambo example, if you got one good example, one good case study started to test and show that this is possible, to protect these species, these interactions, these ecosystems, it will grow organically from there based on how it performs and what it provides. So the message for me is test it, start it, and it needs to remain diverse. We're not saying this is the future for the whole of Sri Lankan tourism, but I don't see a good example of it yet, and I think that if you started, you would start immediately seeing the benefits of that model and then identifying where it could work in other parts of the country. So starting, I think, is my message.
Sharon?
Preserving and protecting, you know. I mean, I think we all need to just prioritize that more than anything else. I try and do it, you know, on an individual basis or through my little 14-room, you know, hotel, basically. But I think that word just needs to, you know, the focus needs to change, Savitri, more than anything else. It's not about the money we can make about it. It's about being stewards of the land, you know, and protecting and preserving what we have.
And Sumit.
Well, since you are looking for some concrete recommendation, I would like to appeal. Now, Sri Lanka has tremendous potential for wildlife tourism. Unfortunately, we are doing it wrong, like I said. So the biggest problem that you see is overcrowding. And since there are tour operators in the audience, I would like to appeal to the tour operators to be a little more judicious in who you send into the parks. Because I feel that many tourists, as part of their tour package, a visit to Yala or Min area or something is included. And since I spend a lot of time in the parks, I have seen at a leopard sighting, the tourist is on his or her phone, or they are asleep. That clearly shows these people never wanted to come into the park. So by just sending all these people in, you're overcrowding the park, reducing the experience for everybody else, and contributing to bad reviews. So I would appeal to the tour operators, be a little more judicious, ask people, do you want to go to a park, and then put the park visit into the itinerary, rather than just including it in a tour package.
Asha, you get the last word.
Thank you. So I'm going to say, prepare to be unpopular. And by that I mean, again, going back that culture of courage that we have to have. Whether it's a tour operator, whether it's us. If you know someone who is talking about going swimming with whales, tell them it's illegal. They might not appreciate it, but you have the right to tell them. That's really important. We need to learn to stop being afraid of standing up for what we are custodians of. And like, I think one practical step with the whale watching industry, for example, is that now when we talk about that, it's over permitted, right? There's way too many boats there, okay? And I feel like an industry like that, or like a lot of these industries, what we really should have been doing, and also, you know, Sumit and I'm sure you remember, Sumit, we went for a meeting about swimming with whales when it is nascency in 2018, right? 2016, right? So now we are still talking about it. Now it's growing. Right? We have to nip it in the bud. We have to stop it. We can't feel like, oh, now it's happening, no, so we better like mandate it. Because it's being done so badly that now there's bad practices already set in place. When we permit vessels for whale watching and stuff, they should be auctioned. Every 2 years, companies should have to, there should be an auction for the limited number of permits. Why? Because if someone's willing to pay the price for that permit, they are willing to work to create an awesome product that can bring that money in to continue their operation, right? So we need to be thinking creatively about how to shift what we have created. Now permits are given and that's it, right? These same operators are there, the boats are there, they're deteriorating, fishery hub was expanded. There's so many issues. We can change it. We have to be creative, we have to be bold, and we have to be prepared to be unpopular and not worry about who's going to vote for me the next time.
Thank you so much to my panel. And like I said, she had the last word, so heed those last few sentences. Courage, very important. Brave, be brave, stand up for what is right. Your gut feeling will tell you what to do. This is a massive discussion. We can go on for hours. But let's take a summary of what we had. One was the discussion needs to start right from the root causes. Bring in the children, bring in the community, make them responsible for conserving what we have, and preserve, conserve, enjoy the treasure that we have been given. This is truly paradise. I believe that. It's just that we who have killed it in some format. And like Vince said, let's start small. Let's find one entity that we can work with and make it a role model so that it becomes an example to work on, and it won't cost much. It won't cost much. It's all about what you do with the passion and the heart for it. And of course, like you said, stand up for what we think is right. If you see something wrong happening, stand up. Tell the tourist or your fellow citizen that is not how it's done. This is how it's done. So thank you very much, each of you, and for adding a lot of value to this discussion. Thank you. I'd like to invite now Mr. Anuradha Kumara Siri, Director General of the National Planning Department of the Ministry of Finance, Economic Stabilization and National Policy, Sri Lanka, for the concluding remarks, and he will be followed by Mr. Srinivas Sampath, Director Water and Urban Development of the ADB Sector Group, and he will join us online.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. it was a good discussion, rich discussion, but I will come back to that. I have to thank Country Director ADB and his team organizing 10th SKOP event, or the Knowledge Serendipity Program. We started during COVID online. Now frequently we are having average maybe 4 events in a year. Therefore, this is the good discussion and good topic. What I feel when there was the discussion, the tourism and the biodiversity, it looked like the husband and wife. I am not going to interpret how it works, but everyone knows. Therefore, we have to have both engagement, right? Therefore, I think the dialogue also given us good thought, thinking in various aspects. I think we have to thank and ADB to invite Mr. Vincent from South African region to give us a lot of insights in their experience, sharing with those experience video and his presentation. And also I have to thank the DG South Asia region of ADB giving opening remarks about Sri Lanka challenges as well as opportunities, how we have to work. And this segment of today, tourism and biodiversity conservation, Sri Lanka is more than 2,500 years history. And of course, we are using our resources for the future, as we discuss children, our next generation, and maybe another years and years to use our resources. And the excess or maybe overcrowding, that may be how we manage, how we plan. But we have to use our resources for the future generation, yes. And the discussion around how we are managing it, how we are working out it, but as a government officer, I think we have to play a bigger role, not only government, because there are a lot of agencies are engaged in this business. What I call business tourism is an income generating activity for many of us, for the country. Therefore, I think we have to have the ceiling or the number. I'm not talking about the number of tourists, but the level of engagement for the country income. There should be a limit, maybe from the tourism sector. Otherwise, we have seen during the discussion, we are overusing. If we are overusing now, our future generation might not have that benefit to use it, the resources. Therefore, we have to have a limit of any aspect. I have been to Bhutan, one example, just brief. Their land is less than 40,000 square kilometers, population less than 1 million, and tourists also around 200 to 300 maximum. They are limiting. They can open it because they have more resources, but they are not doing so. I'm not asking us to do the same, but there are examples, experience around the region and the world, how we are managing. That's what we have to have a proper plan and also strategy how we are going to do it. But very recently, tourism policy already approved by the cabinet, and now we are getting support from the ADB to plan out how we are going ahead coming years. The preparation of a lot of policy document reforms within the tourism sector. I think we have to engage. Today discussion might give us a lot of insight things, but when we are planning, has to work together. Not only government, not only private sector, all relevant parties should work together. And also when during the implementation also we have to work together. If there are any issues, challenges, we have to sort it out ourselves. That's the main thing what I got today. And this is our country. Yes, this is our country. We have to use properly. And I agree, almost all the speakers, what they have given, they are thinking, their experience, that's good for the country to manage our resources, especially the biodiversity. Therefore, I think this good opportunity for us to have a dialogue, discussion. Don't stop only today's discussion. I know, because we know that some issues we have been talking last several years, decades maybe. Therefore, I think President Secretariat now, there is a place to have a overarching body to discuss all the issues, challenges, and the implementation of actions and monitoring, evaluation. Or that may be a good place to have the dialogue and also way forward to tourism and the biodiversity. And thanking everyone who are participating here. We organize jointly with the ADB and the National Planning Department. We like to thank online participants as well as physically with us here today now, and the good speakers, inviting Vincent from South Africa by the ADB, and giving all the opportunities, support, and thank everyone, and see you next SKOP event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kumar Siri. And online, joining us online is the Director, Water and Urban Development of the ADB Sector Group, Mr. Srinivas Sampath.
Thank you very much. I think I want to make sure that I'm audible. You can all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much. Honorable officials of Sri Lanka government, esteemed panelists on this. First of all, let me start by stating a very high quality open discussions on many of the critical elements of tourism and biodiversity. It's been very encouraging to see the government, private sectors, particularly civil society coming together around this important topic on tourism and biodiversity and having an open and honest debate on the subject. I was remarkably struck by the impact story delivered by Vince on the work Wilderness is doing in Africa. Vince's presentation has been a real eye-opener for me in terms of the value creation that conservation efforts can do, which not only helps and it's good for the planet, but also is good for the business and for the community that resides around these biospheres, which is phenomenal. And having had the opportunity of being to Sri Lanka several times, I have experienced it myself firsthand, the tremendous potential of this beautiful country and its abundant cultural and, of course, natural attraction. But I must say, I've also been seeing the challenges that have been mentioned about the panelists, which is why I think the forum that we organized today has been very, very timely. I find it very encouraging to hear about many different modalities that exist and are possible enablers for high value tourism development. I guess key for that would be to have agreements with the government and active engagement with local communities, which makes me think that a workable solution and an opportunity for Sri Lanka certainly exist. The pivot for all this is where the government and the public sector agencies will have to play an enabling role and help debottleneck regulatory and institutional environment and allow the private sector to deliver the tourism experience. And at the heart of this is going to be the resilience. And I think that's really the foundation for sustainability, having the sustainable tourism pathway for Sri Lanka. There are many, models and templates available for attracting from international to domestic, and we saw some of the examples that Vince provided. Yes, there is a great value for high-end tourism, but there is also a very large domestic market within Sri Lanka and a much larger South Asian market that also sees an opportunity to enjoy resources of its encouraging. And it's really good to see how Sri Lanka can make such tourism elements more accessible to Sri Lankans and a wider population of developing countries. Everyone should be able to appreciate, respect, and enjoy biodiversity. As was mentioned in the introduction by our Director General this afternoon, tourism is an important and an emerging area for ADB support, where we really want to bring the public and the private sector together to tackle the challenges of sustainability and resilience through joint responsibility, but also strengthen private sector operations. The private sector tourism operators need an enabling environment that makes innovative operations possible with products that do justice to the diversity of the wildlife on offer, both on land and sea. And we heard about the discussion that Asha was talking about the sea and the issues that came up. We heard there are agencies that may be working at cross purposes right now, and there are many old and outdated pieces of legislation that needs updating to be aligned with international best practices. This can then ensure that the competitiveness of Sri Lanka as a tourism destination is further strengthened and sustained. Growth in tourism, therefore, must not solely be focused on looking at arrival numbers, but more on the contribution of each visitor makes to the economy and the cost of the environment. Because of what we heard today, it is again something very important to remember that the private sector can be a very strong enabler, strong driver to deliver some of these interesting tourism elements and tourism solutions. We hope that the tourism program that we are developing with the government of Sri Lanka, which is going to go for ADB's board consideration later this year, can address and resolve some of the structural impediments affecting the tourism sector in India. We also need to recognize that it can't be free for all, and build first and figure out later attitude is going to require a lot of planning, capacity development assessments, the enablement of careful management of execution of various integrated components. As Vince was saying, planning is important, and that's but it's important to have that right environment and let private sector come and execute the investment. They need to go hand in hand, and this balancing act is going to require a continuous dialogue. And we hope that from ADB side we can support this continuous dialogue between the government and the private sector. The ADB's lending pipeline, as was mentioned by ADB's country director Taka, includes a sector development program for tourism with an indicative financing of 100 million for a sub-program within this year, and a subsequent 80 million for a second program in 2025. This sub-program also includes a 30 million investment component to support sustainable tourism both in Sigiriya and Trincomalee. And we are hoping that some of the reforms, particularly targeting opening up of the issues, structural bottlenecks that we have, can help address binding constraints the private sector faces when it comes to tourism. In addition, through the technical assistance funding of 1.5 million, which also includes support for marine tourism development, we hope that we can also address some of the issues related to protecting marine tourism in Sri Lanka. We'll continue to work very closely with the various stakeholders, and we really hope that these discussions that we've had today would help us to create a more sustainable pathway for moving forward. So thank you for all your contributions, and we look forward to seeing progress being made. On behalf of ADB, we remain committed to promoting tourism and private sector development in Sri Lanka, and we look forward to engaging with all of you moving forward. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you to Mr. Srinivas Sampath. Enable, empower, enjoy. That's what we need to do, talking about conservation and its relationship with tourism. Thank you very much, each and every one of you, for joining us today. There is a lot of discussion that went on, lots for you to take home, think about, and put into action when and if able. We are all responsible for our footprint, so maybe the time starts now. Thank you again on behalf of ADB. Lunch is served in the foyer outside. You can serve and bring your lunch to the tables inside here. Thank you again.
Sri Lanka. You'll come back for more.
What makes the perfect trip to Sri Lanka? We asked some locals for their point of view. Take advantage of the year-round climate and head to the beach. Feel the sun in your face and the sand beneath your feet. Run down to the ocean and let the warm waves wash over you. Relax and watch your troubles float away. If you're a morning person, rise with the sun and explore the city. Next, grab your camera. For a tour of temples built thousands of years ago. Alternatively, head to the wilderness. See mountains, the tea country, or discover the royal fortress for marvels built 50 centuries ago. If you're feeling curious, head deep into the jungle. Explore the mangroves, filled with characters. This island doesn't like to rush. Kick back, enjoy some fine dining, and take time to unwind.